Hola, Connecticut COLT members. This is Yensen Sierra Lambert with video number 2 on how to help your students have a successful AP Spanish Language and Culture exam. Today, I'm going to talk to you about task number 1 of the free response section, which is the email, el correo electrónico. As I mentioned in the previous email, I've participated many times on the AP reading in Cincinnati. So some of the recommendations, or most of the recommendations and tips that I'm going to share with you today, I've learned from my experience scoring, grading all of these emails. So let's go ahead and get started. So really quick, a review of the task. The students have 15 minutes to read an email from either a person looking for an intern for the summer, a person looking to fill a position for a summer job, maybe someone who would like to give you a scholarship. There are a variety of scenarios. But the objective here is the students need to read the email, comprehend the email, and reply to that email with a brief email of their own, right? So this is how the AP exam assesses their interpersonal written skills. So they have 15 minutes to complete it. And it's task number 1 after their break, after the multiple choice section of the exam. So I want to start with the rubric. So I feel like the rubric really helps me explain the layers of, to the email. So here I have the 5 because, we're striving for the 5. And this is what the students must do, right? So if you look at bullet points 1, 2, 3, this is the what. So the students need to, number 1, maintain the exchange by answering the questions that they read. They also need to use a formal register. It's a fancy email. So they need to use the usted form as opposed to the tú form. They also need to use a variety of expressions that are also considered to be formal and sophisticated. The students also need to request information or ask questions. So that's just the what. Now, the way that they get to the 4 or the 5 is through the how, which are the remaining bullet points in the rubric. So in addition to answering the questions, asking for information, greeting, saying goodbye, and using a formal register, it's important that students also use a variety of vocabulary words, that they're not repetitive, and also that they're not too basic. They also need to use advanced structures whenever they have the opportunity to do so. And I'm going to show you a few examples of that. Okay, so here's what it would look like on the AP exam. You have el tema curricular, which is the theme, el arte y la belleza, and then they have the introduction. So recommendation number 1, encourage your students to read the introduction, because sometimes they'll get an email with unfamiliar words, language they don't understand very well. And sometimes the introduction can help them understand the context. It can give them clues as to what they're about to read. So it's very important that they read it. So here it says, has recibido el siguiente mensaje, ¿por qué solicitaste para trabajar como pasante universitario? Right? So one of the scenarios that I mentioned earlier, here we have someone looking for an intern. So it's probably a summer internship after freshman year of college, sophomore year of college. So I like to use this hand that you see right here, and this I copied from another colleague that uses it as a way to help his students remember the things they need to include in the email. So I have my students practice with their hand in class, right? So number 1, it needs to be formal. Number 2, they need to have a greeting, un saludo. 3, they need to have a goodbye, una despedida. They must answer the questions. They must ask questions. And right in the middle, you have elaboración. And I have my students do this, use this sort of reminder organizer so that they can include everything that we've gone over in class. So feel free to use this with your kids to help them remember what they need to do for the email. So here's a sample email written to a student, estimado estudiante. So right off the bat, it has that formal feel, that formal register, and you can see the questions right in the middle. And that's one thing I like about the email task is that the way that it's structured, it is visually accessible for our students. So I tell my students to immediately circle those 2 questions they see so that they don't forget to answer them. So again, in the beginning, le agradecemos mucho su interés. As you can see, they're addressing you in a formal way. One thing I forgot to say right before this slide, remember that, and please remind your students that this email they're getting is actually a response to the initial email the students sent, it's fake, imaginary, requested information. So for example, say you saw an ad on the paper, they're looking to fill a position in a local art gallery. The student reached out, either sent an email, filled out a survey, sent a text message, whatever it was. So this is the gallery responding to that initial correspondence, right? So that's important for the students to know. So again, it's formal. And here you have the questions. ¿Podría darnos un ejemplo de una obra? So I encourage my students to underline keywords like un ejemplo. They're looking for a specific example of an art piece, una obra de arte. ¿Cuáles elementos en la obra de arte destacan más la perspectiva? It's really important that they highlight those keywords like perspectiva and práctica, because if they don't address the questions, their email may be incomplete. Okay, moving on. So how do you answer this email? How do you reply to the email? So again, saludo formal, responder a cada pregunta. You have to answer both questions, not just one. You have to reply to both questions to get a 5. There has to be elaboration. You have to ask for information. Again, there has to be a goodbye, and you have to have a formal register. So make sure your students have that list memorized in their heads, because they are not allowed to write this down on their hands. So this is just for them to practice in class. Okay, so a couple of other tips that I'd like to share with you. Number 1, make sure that they have some sort of greeting memorized that they could use for any email that they have to reply to. And also ask them to carefully look at the person who wrote to them so that they get the gender, they write the gender correctly, whether it's señor or señora, though that's never been the reason not to give a student a 5, right? But those little details are important. So things like espero que se encuentre bien to sort of initiate the correspondence are very useful. And if you would like the packet that I use with useful phrases to use in the email, just shoot me an email and I'd be more than happy to send it to you, and you can share it with your students. Number 2, this is not required, but I train my students to follow that initial greeting with some sort of gratitude, like, thank you so much for reaching out to me, as we would in English, right? This is a formal email, so you want to interact in a formal way. So maybe it's a good idea to have a few of these phrases handy or memorized to initiate the email. And in that initial paragraph, I encourage my students to mention something about the project, right? Like, me da mucho gusto practicar en este proyecto, or internship, pasantía, or me da mucho gusto, me hace mucha ilusión solicitar para esta beca. They're applying for a scholarship. So something that addresses the job or the internship or the scholarship that they're applying for is a good way to organize it. These things are not required. This is just something that I encourage my students to do so that they have an email that reads well, that flows, that is formal, and it's also beautifully written. Tip number 4, this is a good way to share your knowledge of grammar structures. Like, for example, the present perfect, right? So the email is about either an internship, again, a scholarship, or a job. So to me, that seems like a good opportunity to mention experiences I have had that are related to this particular position or internship, or that make me experiences that make me the right candidate for this internship. So why not use the present perfect and show off your skills in advanced structures in Spanish? So that's something you can do. Number 5, make sure you answer the questions with in detail elaboration. They don't need to be super, super long. You just need to use the right words. So avoid basic language like bueno and grande, because, those are words that our students learn in Spanish 1, and it's okay in Spanish 1 and Spanish 2, pero en la clase de AP, we can use more sophisticated language. Let's see. So I ask my students when we practice in my classroom to always ask 2 questions. 2 questions are not required. They just need to ask a question. But 2 questions is better. Why? Because writing another question may also be a way to elaborate. And there is a bullet point on the rubric from the first slide that we saw, where elaboration is a key part of, getting a 5. So if they have time to ask a second question, why not? Now, this question has to be relevant. So what I ask my students to do is to go through the email they've read and ask a follow-up question to something they've already read. Number 1, it's relevant. Number 2, it also demonstrates that they've comprehended the email. So that's what I would recommend. Looking at the email, looking at that paragraph that you get, and looking for parts of that paragraph that would help you come up with a follow-up question and relevant question. Let's see. Before saying goodbye, I ask my students to, again, say thank you for the opportunity. And again, these are phrases that they could, memorize, and they can tweak them. So it's not like they have to memorize an entire statement, but perhaps just the beginning, and then plug in whatever is relevant for that particular email, the content of that email. Now, in these phrases, you also have an opportunity to use more sophisticated language. Yeah. Let's see. Other recommendations for elaboration, right? So as I mentioned, using the present perfect is great for the email, because again, the email is about either an internship, a summer job, a scholarship, something of that sort. And mentioning experience, right? What better way to do that than with the present perfect, and show that you can use more than the present tense, the preterite, and the imperfect, right? So it's up there. The present perfect, it's up there in terms of advanced structures. Another way to elaborate is to offer comments that have impersonal phrases plus the present tense of the subjunctive. That really impresses the readers. So I highly recommend that. The present tense of the subjunctive is really all they need. Es impresionante que los niños puedan comunicarse. Another way to use the present tense of the subjunctive is to provide a suggestion or recommendation, ¿no? Les recomiendo que tengan actividades interactivas. So sometimes one of the questions that they'll get will be about, what are some ideas that you have for the summer program? What are some ideas that you have to promote this summer program, right? So whenever you're making suggestions, giving ideas, you can use the subjunctive. Why not take that opportunity to use the subjunctive and demonstrate that you can manage, you can use advanced structures? Yeah. So these are my tips. These are my recommendations, last minute recommendations for the email. If you would like more resources, if you would like this PowerPoint that I just showed you, and the packet that I give my students with a list of phrases that could be used in different parts of the email, shoot me an email and I'll send it to you. My email is ylambert@gfacademy.org. Send me an email and I'm more than happy to share it with you. So hopefully this will give you something to practice for the next few days as you get ready for the AP exam. I will see you next time. And I'm going to talk about the ensayo or the essay. I have a few tips for the argumentative essay to share with you in the next video. So till next time, hasta luego. Muchas gracias.